Hello, friends. Before you start reading this text, do me one small favor. Like and subscribe to the channel. Why? Because the story you are about to learn will not just flip your understanding of World War II on its head. It will make you question the very foundations of military technology. You surely think that helicopters are an invention of the 50s or 60s, a symbol of the Vietnam War, right? What if I told you that the ghostly shadows of rotorcraft were already circling in the leaden skies of Europe when the outcome of the most terrible slaughter in human history was still uncertain? That Nazi Germany had not just a project, but operational, flying helicopters that saw active service? Sounds like science fiction? Then get ready, because reality is about to get much more interesting than any fiction. And at the end of this story, a main question awaits you. One you'll want to discuss in the comments. I promise you'll have something to say. Stay with me, don't click away. It's worth it. German helicopters of World War II. The forgotten Wunderwaffe that could have changed everything, but ran out of time. Imagine not just a battlefield. Clear your mind of the standard pictures from history textbooks. Set aside the newsreel footage of marching infantry columns, the clanking tank treads, and the screaming dive bombers. I want you to see a different reality. A reality that actually existed, but was lost in the smoke and ashes of the fallen Third Reich. So, picture the Eastern Front, say the year 1943. Bitter cold. Somewhere, artillery thunders. The earth, mixed with snow, rains down from the sky from the explosions. And then, over the front line, through breaks in the clouds, comes a strange, unfamiliar sound. It's not the steady drone of airplane engines or the piercing shriek of Messerschmitts. It's something else. A rapid, alarming, almost insect-like buzzing. Soldiers look up, and they see it. Against the winter sky, motionless, as if glued in place, hovers a strange machine. It has no wings. Instead, there are two huge rotating rotors. It can move sideways, backward, turn on the spot, hover just above the ground. It sees everything. It is the all-seeing eye that wasn't supposed to exist. This is not fantasy. This is the German Flettner Fi-282 Colibri Hummingbird. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you still think helicopters are product of the post-war technological boom, prepare to be amazed. Germany lifted its first truly operational helicopter, the Flettner Fi-282 Colibri, into the air as early as 1940, a year before the attack on the USSR. And right behind it, a real giant took to the skies, the transport Dragon, the Focke-Wulf Fa-223, which was capable of carrying cargo and paratroopers. This story is not just a dry technical briefing. It's a tale of genius engineers, of power blinded by ambition, of a war that devoured the most advanced technologies without giving them a chance to blossom, and of how thin the line is between historical reality and the alternate history that could have become our terrifying truth. Let's break it all down. How it all began. The race for a sky no one could conquer. To understand why Germany so zealously threw itself into developing rotorcraft, we need to take a brief excursion into the history of aviation. The 20th century, with its frantic technological rhythm, was an era of great daring. Humanity was conquering the air, but the airplane, for all its merits, had one fundamental flaw. It needed a runway. It was tied to the ground, to airfields. But what if you need to land a machine on a tiny patch in a forest, on the deck of a ship, on a city square? What if you don't need to fly over a target at high speed, but to hover over it and conduct surveillance, adjust artillery fire, or drop off saboteurs? Many dreamed this dream, the dream of a true vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Even Leonardo da Vinci sketched his designs for an aerial screw. In the 30s, work was boiling all over the world. But it was in Germany, with its powerful engineering school and militaristic slant, that this dream found the most fertile ground. The main hero of this part of our story is a man named Anton Flettner. If you haven't heard this name, don't be surprised. History is unfair to the geniuses who worked for the dark side. Flettner was a brilliant engineer ahead of his time. He wasn't reinventing the wheel. He was creating a jet engine for it. His brain was working on the problem of stability and control of a rotorcraft when most aircraft designers around the world considered the helicopter a hopeless toy. And so, in July of 1940, amidst the blazing flames of the Blitzkrieg, when Germany seemed invincible, Flettner presented his masterpiece, the Flettner Fi-282 Colibri. The machine was so revolutionary that the high command of the Luftwaffe, despite its conservatism, could not help but notice its potential. A decision was made, which I will discuss in more detail later, to put 30 experimental prototypes and 15 pre-production aircraft into production. It seemed the path for helicopters into the skies of the Third Reich was open. But why a helicopter? Why not direct all resources to producing thousands more tanks or airplanes? The answer lies in the very strategy of the Nazis. They were betting on Wunderwaffe, wonder weapons that were supposed to turn the tide of the war with a single blow. The V-1 and V-2 rockets, the Me-262 jet fighters, the Super Heavy Mouse tank. In this line of fantastic projects, helicopters occupied their own special tactical niche. They were meant to be the asymmetric response, the tool the enemy lacked. They were to become the eyes and ears of the fleet, fast couriers, rescuers, and liaisons in conditions where any other technology would be helpless. The Colibri, a steel hummingbird with an iron heart. A detailed breakdown. Let's take a closer look at this marvel of engineering. The Flettner Fi-282 Colibri did not look like modern helicopters with one main rotor and a small tail rotor. It had its own unique and brilliant design. Two large intermeshing rotors rotating in opposite directions on crossed axes. This system canceled out the torque and made the machine incredibly stable. Imagine yourself in the seat of a test pilot lifting the Colibri into the air for the first time. Contemporaries noted that during takeoff and initial climb, the machine shook considerably. Vibration damping technology was in its infancy then. But as soon as it left the ground and gained a few dozen meters, the vibration disappeared and the Colibri turned into an obedient, stable creature hovering in the sky. Its flight characteristics for the time were astounding. Speed. It could reach a speed of up to 150 kilometers per hour in forward flight. That's like speeding down a modern German Autobahn in a car, but in three-dimensional space. Maneuverability. This is where the real magic began. It could move sideways at speeds of up to 24 kilometers per hour. Imagine the reaction of anti-aircraft gunners trying to sight a target that isn't flying straight, but is smoothly drifting sideways. Service ceiling. Its operational ceiling was 3,300 meters, more than enough for most tactical tasks. Crew. The machine was two-seater, but with a clever layout. The pilot sat facing forward, while the passenger or observer sat facing backward. This provided excellent all-round visibility for observation. Initially, the Colibri was created as a shipborne helicopter for the Navy, and it was a brilliant idea. A cruiser or battleship equipped with such an apparatus radically increased its vision radius. It could detect enemy submarines and surface ships far over the horizon. The tests conducted in 1942 in the Baltic on the cruiser Köln were a triumph for Flettner. The Colibri took off and landed on a specially equipped small platform in conditions of strong wind and swell that would have been deadly for any airplane. It proved its viability in the harshest conditions. The Drache Awakens, a heavy transport helicopter born in fire. While the Colibri was honing its skills, another German firm, Focke-Rachel, was working on a much more ambitious project. If the Colibri was a scout, a dragonfly, then the Focke-Rachel Fa-223 Drache was meant to be a real flying truck, the workhorse of the Wehrmacht. Its creator, Professor Heinrich Focke, was no less a legendary figure than Flettner. His Drache was a monster by the standards of the time. It also used a twin transverse rotor design, but was the size of a small bomber. Its history is a tragic saga of how war stifles innovation. The Drache's first flight also took place in 1940, but its production became a nightmare. The factories where it was assembled were repeatedly wiped off the face of the earth by Allied bombing raids. Production was moved, set up from scratch, and bombed again. As a result, Throughout the entire war, the Germans were able to build and put into service no more than 10 or 15 of these machines at any one time. Imagine this absurdity: a brilliant machine without equal in the world, and it cannot influence the course of the war simply because it cannot be physically assembled. But even the few units that took to the sky showed phenomenal capabilities. Speed, up to 170 kilometers per hour. Range, 700 kilometers. It could have dropped sabotage groups deep behind enemy lines. Service ceiling, almost 5,000 meters, 4,880. Payload, 500 kilograms. That's several soldiers with full gear or ammunition for a surrounded unit, or even a suspended boat for rescue operations at sea. The Dratch could be armed with a machine gun and carry bombs. It could be used for medical evacuation, transport, or rescue. It was a true multi-role platform, a concept that would only be fully appreciated decades later. Combat use, myths, legends, and harsh reality. So, did German helicopters fly in real combat conditions? Yes, but their story is not one of daring cavalry charges. It's a story of quiet, almost invisible work. 20 colibris were sent to the Mediterranean Sea to protect convoys supplying German-Italian forces in North Africa. They took off from the decks of ships and conducted anti-submarine patrols. Their ability to hover over the water and listen to sonobuoys was invaluable. It is not known if they managed to sink a single submarine, but the very fact of their work made the Allied submarine commanders nervous. And the most dramatic and perhaps cinematic story is connected with the last days of the Reich. Spring of 1945, the city of Breslau, now Wrocław, has been turned into a fortress and is surrounded by the advancing Red Army. The fanatical Gauleiter Karl Henk is trapped inside. The Führer bunker orders him to be extracted at any cost. How? An airplane is no longer an option. And then it appears the colibri. Picture this scene: the ruins of a city, the glow of fires, the whistle of bullets and shells. And above this hell, dancing in the rotor downdraft, hovers a lone helicopter. It lands on a tiny patch of land, picks up Hank, and disappears into the night sky, leaving the city's defenders to their certain doom. This was one of the last flights of the colibri. Symbolic and terrifying. A technology created for war was ultimately used to save one of its chief ideologues. Economy and history. Why the miracle didn't happen. Here we come to the most interesting part, the analysis. Let's ask the main question: if the helicopters were so good, why didn't they fill the skies of Europe and change the course of the war? The answer lies in the cold logic of economics and strategy. 1. Economic context. The war of resources. By 1944, the German economy, despite slave labor and total mobilization, was exhausted. The Allies methodically destroyed factories, knocked out oil refineries, and cut off the supply of strategic raw materials. Producing one Dratch helicopter was incomparably more complex and expensive than producing a dozen standard aircraft. The Germans planned to build 1,000 colibris and hundreds of Dratchen, but these plans remained on paper. The factory in Johannesthal, where the colibris were assembled, was turned into a pile of rubble during one of the many Allied air raids. War is not only about brilliant engineers. It is also about machine tools, steel, aluminum, fuel, and labor. By the end of the war, Germany was catastrophically short of all these. 2. Historical analysis. A strategic mistake. The German command, especially Hitler, suffered from gigantomania. They were obsessed with giant breakthrough projects, but they lacked a strategy for their competent tactical application. A helicopter is a tool for specific, pinpoint tasks: reconnaissance, communication, special operations. It is not win global battles by itself. The Germans tried to create a universal weapon that would turn the tide of the war by the very fact of its existence. They failed to integrate helicopters into their military machine to give them the right doctrine. Helicopters were a curiosity, not a standard unit in the table of organization. 3. Technical limitations. Yes, they were revolutionary, but they were first-generation machines. They were vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. especially when hovering. Their engines were not powerful enough, their construction fragile. They required years of refinement and modernization. Germany did not have those years. The war dictated its harsh conditions. We needed it yesterday. What if? The alternate history that never was. And now let's speculate. This is the very part one started this story for. What if Flettner's and Focke's factories hadn't been bombed? What if by the beginning of 1944, the Germans had not 10, but 300, 500 helicopters? Would it have changed the course of the war? My answer, based on studying tons of historical material, is no. It would not have. The war was lost by Germany the moment it attacked the Soviet Union and declared war on the USA. The industrial and human power of the Allied coalition was immeasurably greater than the capabilities of the Third Reich. 500 helicopters would not have stopped tens of thousands of Soviet T-34 tanks or shot down tens of thousands of American flying fortresses. But they could have made the war even bloodier and more protracted. Imagine deep rear sabotage, groups of Drachen dropping saboteurs on Ural factories, helicopter wolf packs, colibris coordinating the actions of artillery and tanks, negating the advantage in numbers. Crew rescue, pilots shot down over Germany quickly returning to service, saved by helicopter rescue services. Helicopters would not have saved the Third Reich, but they would have cost the lives of hundreds of thousands, perhaps even millions of additional victims. And in this lies the main lesson. A technological breakthrough in the hands of a mad ideology does not lead to victory. It only leads to the multiplication of suffering. Trophies that change the world. The war ended. Most of the colibris and Drachen were destroyed by the Germans themselves or bombed. But 3 machines survived. 2 colibris were captured by the Americans, 1 by the Soviet troops. And here the most ironic part of the story begins. American and Soviet engineers greedily took the German trophies apart, down to the last screw. Flettner emigrated to the USA after the war and consulted for American firms. Heinrich Focke worked for the British for a while. The knowledge, technologies, and developments all became the property of the victors. The first mass-produced American helicopter, the Sikorsky R-4, was in many ways simpler and more primitive than the Colibri. But it was the German developments, especially Flettner's intermeshing rotor system, that gave a powerful impetus to helicopter development in both superpowers. It can be said with confidence that the Soviet Mi-8 and the American Sikorsky WWII, symbols of the Cold War, are the distant but direct descendants of those very colibris and Drachen that circled the skies over the ruins of the Third Reich. So, that's the end of our story. The history of German helicopters is a story of missed opportunities, of a technological breakthrough crushed by the wheel of war, and a grim reminder that the future is often born in the darkest corners of the past. What do you think? Could helicopters, produced in mass series, have seriously influenced the course of the war? Maybe you have your own, alternative version of history? I'm waiting for your thoughts, your hypotheses, your debates in the comments. Let's discuss this incredible page of history together. And if this material hooked you, made you think and want to learn more, support the channel, subscribe, and hit the like button. This will help us continue to find and tell you the most exciting and unknown stories. Until next time in our virtual history club.